presentation at class to allow everyone else to have enough time. So with us is Dr. Laura Owen, and she will present on higher ed. So we're really coming to different population and moving quickly because, you know, if we want to give time for every single group or study, we can be here days and days. So, but at least we're getting a glimpse of what's going on with research in that area.
So, still good morning, a little bit before the afternoon. I just want to tell you up front that I'm actually going to be presenting this from a little bit of a backwards approach. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research I've been doing, the work that I've been engaged in, and then how that led us to a connection to social emotional competency. And so I actually am going to cover K-12. As well as higher ed. I am a practitioner at heart. I was a school counselor for many, many years and the district director where I supervised about 350 school counselors in a really large urban school district in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so I feel like everything I do as a researcher now is because it needs to translate to practice. And even our Center for Post-Secondary Readiness and Success is looking at advising and counseling strategies, K-12 and higher ed. And what kind of supports do we need to put in place for students? So hopefully it'll be contextual and have some meaning for you working as teachers in the schools. So I just wanted to start with this quote because I think it touches on the work that we've been doing. But any young person's post-secondary path is shaped by many people, different practices, experiences, programs, and intimately connecting all of that to the developmental process that occurs within that young person's life. So it doesn't just happen that we get to this time of transition and nothing else is going on. There's a lot of things that have influenced where students get to. So the work that I've been engaged in has been very much about looking at college access, post-secondary access, whether it be 2-year, 4-year apprenticeship, on-the-job training. How do we look at it from an equity perspective? And so I think you'll hear that through some of the work. And I did just want to start, hopefully I didn't make this too researchy. If I did, I'll try to go through some of that a little bit faster. But one of the things that we're really concerned about in the work that we're doing is that when you look at the percentage of students who actually enter college and graduate, when we break it down by socioeconomic status, low-income students complete at a much lower rate. Right now, that rate, roughly 12 to 15% of low-income students who start finish. And so we're also concerned about persistence in graduation as well as getting students to college. So my dissertation was actually a look at a federal government program that rolled out called the FAFSA Completion Project. This rolled out in 2011, and what it was a way to, for the very first time, get information in the hands of administrators or teachers or counselors to say, here's where a student is in the process of looking at financial aid. And because of my work, I'll tell you what we learned from the dissertation, but because of my work with this project, I also had the opportunity to work with U.S. Department of Ed and their federal student aid office. And I became a very vocal, concerned citizen of the fact that we were rolling out this program and telling everyone there's $60 billion of financial aid available for all students. And I was working in a district with a large number of undocumented students who did not qualify and could not receive that funding. And it concerned me that when we were rolling out these big programs saying everyone qualifies for it. And so it's a concern that I have whenever we talk about implementation of anything, whether a school can actually implement a program and a curriculum the way it was designed to be implemented, or we roll out these big projects saying we have all these resources when in reality, we don't really have them for everyone. They're not for everyone, they're for certain groups of students. So the one thing that was really exciting in Albuquerque about the FAFSA Completion Project was we decided this couldn't be successful unless it became a community-wide project. And so we worked with the mayor's office. We decided we had no borders or boundaries in our schools. We worked with our community colleges, our 4-year universities, and we trained all of our counselors. We trained anyone from the community who wanted to come in and be trained. We trained the faith-based community. We provided training to parents, and we trained in English and in Spanish. And the idea was, first of all, you're talking about finances, and if parents have not engaged in the school or have only engaged for negative reasons, because that's a lot of what happens by the time they get to high school, the end of middle school, is parents aren't invited to come back in the schools. They get invited if there's a discipline issue or there's something going wrong. And so here we're talking about bringing your income taxes and sharing very personal information. Or I can't tell you how many students would whisper in my ear and say, Miss, I don't have a social security number. And there's a lot of implication and danger in doing that. And so we wanted to create these centers that were trusted centers where they could come to us, but more than that, we wanted to create people in the community who could just start talking about the myths around financial aid, the myths around going to college, and that was really important to us. I'm not going to tell you more about it, but it's really exciting. If you want to hear what we did to engage with the community, I'm happy to share that with you later. We worked with a little bit over 9,000 students. This was an RCT study where we had some students who didn't receive any of the intervention and some who did. What we wanted to know was the students who got the extra help, because the counselors had access to this information where students were in the process, did that create more students who completed the FAFSA application, and then most important, did more students actually enroll in college. And so the exciting thing was, yes, more students started, more students finished, and we had about a 12-point increase in college enrollment, which was about a 25% increase in college enrollment, which for an educational statistic is pretty amazing. So we were very excited about that. We also looked at another study that had been done with H&R Block, and it was some researchers out of Stanford and Harvard that took 100 different H&R Block businesses or chartered businesses in Ohio and North Carolina, and they identified students who would qualify for the full Pell Grant, federal Pell Grant, and they did another RCT where half of them received a flyer that said, here's information about how to apply for the Pell Grant, and the other half got a stamped self-addressed envelope to federal student aid to do their paper FAFSA. It was all filled out. They just had to stick it in the mail. And almost identical impact. So we were really excited to see that if you can really help families, you can make a difference. The first year that U.S. Department of Ed rolled out this FAFSA completion project, unfortunately, they said we were going to have these lists. We were going to get them every week or bi-weekly if we wanted them, and their database wasn't ready. And I will never forget the date because it was the first day of graduation. We got our first list on May 16th. So because of that, we ended up hiring counselors to stay on in the summer and to work with families who needed help and support. Because of that work, some of the issues we identified from students who were trying to transition in the summer, I got connected to some students. They were graduate students at Harvard, and they were looking at this issue of summer melt. And summer melt traditionally had been defined by higher ed institutions as what are the percentages of students who apply to come here that actually don't show up. But higher ed institutions could have cared less, to be quite frank, because at the time, all they looked at was, I have too many students applying. I'm assuming if they didn't come here, they went somewhere else. There really wasn't anyone looking to say, okay, are they going anywhere else? And what these two researchers did was they actually took the educational longitudinal study of 2002, which is really, really messy. They've applied and they've been accepted. But by fall, something has happened and they actually don't show up. And so I started working with them. We worked with over 300,000 students across the country, but we worked in different school districts across the country to actually identify what was the percentage of melt that's going on in these school districts. These are all pretty large urban school districts. And you can see it's anywhere from 21% to 50%, with 50% was in Baltimore. I actually am just finishing up a study in Washington, D.C., and it's 40%. That was just this last year. And so when we start talking about this, this is not a small number of students. And I felt like as a school counselor and as a K-12 practitioner, these are the students that we're celebrating. We think they've come through the whole K-12 process. They've had these ideas of goals that they wanted to accomplish, and they're moving on. And then to realize that it's this high. Well, we wanted to understand, why is this happening? So there's some reasons that we knew early on from meeting with families, meeting with students, things about, schools a lot of times close down. Right after graduation, there's no one there who can help during this really critical time of the summer to support them. There's a lot of confusion around paperwork. This is when many times the financial aid process becomes, it kicks up in a gear. The students get their financial aid award letters. It's a time when students really need more support and they haven't had it. And if we think about low-income first-generation students, in terms of social capital, they're obviously less likely to have a family member or someone they know who's been through the process. When we talk about middle-income, college-educated families, there's probably multiple people, their parents, aunts, uncles, maybe siblings who can help them with the information. I'm just going to check my time here. Whoops, are you timing me? I just want to make sure I don't. Okay, I can see.
10 minutes.
So we also looked at what other hurdles are coming up. So we found issues around tiny gaps. So a student could get their tuition bill and it might say, you owe an extra $800 to pay for your health insurance. Well, they didn't have someone who could guide them and tell them, if you're on your parents' health insurance, you don't have to pay the university health insurance. But for a family that might have already been working, parents working 2 or 3 jobs, that's down to the penny, that $800 means the difference between whether they're going to go or they're going to have to stay home. And so there were lots of issues that were financial in origin. Also, maybe my best friend has changed their mind and they're going to stay home now. I don't want to go. Students who feel guilty because they are part of the financial support for their family. And going away means now I can no longer be providing that support, causing them to make other decisions. So we looked at different interventions to try to support students. A series of interventions that was direct counselor outreach to them. We've done some peer mentoring outreach. We've also looked at text messaging. I'm going to go through this really quickly because I want to get to the text messaging piece that really gets to the social, emotional parts of this. Because I'm more a qualitative researcher. I can do the quantitative and I like it, but I like to tell the story about why this is happening. To me, that makes more sense about what we're trying to learn. So we really found across these interventions that students who did receive the outreach and receive support did enroll at higher rates. Definitely, it was more pronounced for low-income students, first-generation students. We also wanted to see, does this carry over? And it actually does carry over all the way into college graduation. And so now we're trying to go back to understand what were all the mechanisms in place that really helped a one-time intervention in the summer between high school graduation and college that for some reason is maintaining itself and helping these students to graduate. And I'll tell you what I think it is when we get to the social emotional piece. This was the impacts when you looked at text messaging, peer mentoring, and our control group. And this was Boston and Dallas. I'm not going to do a lot of details, but again, lack of information and support on the process, financial challenges, confusion just about the whole process as a whole, getting very discouraged over the summer and just finally saying, I can't do this, I give up, I'm not going to do this anymore. Really serious issues around transportation. That's something we could talk a long time about and think about how we could better support students around issues of transportation. It really does become limiting. A lack of motivation. Maybe somebody's been sort of prodding them the whole way and telling them, this is what you want to do, and they're not necessarily committed to that. And so we also find counselors had a lot of challenges in this. The inconsistencies as the counselors worked across universities and colleges and what the process looked like. A lack of communication between the housing department and the admissions office and forms that weren't shared. And so students sometimes, because the financial aid form doesn't get there in time, their housing gets canceled. and then they no longer have a place to live. And counselors who weren't even aware of this, they got really frustrated in the process that would be on the phone with multiple people. But the one thing that never happened in this, the counselors never did this work without the student with them. So often when they were having those conversations with the university, they were either guiding the student, so the student's on the phone talking to the different offices on campus, or the student's sitting there with them. And we think part of what's happening in this process is they were learning how to advocate for themselves. They were learning how to problem solve. They were learning a lot of the social, emotional skills that they were going to need to be successful. So we've also moved on to this very large study that we received some money from the IES, which is the U.S. Department of Ed's research arm. And I worked with researchers at Harvard, University of Pittsburgh, University of Virginia, and Boston College. And what I'm going to share with you, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but Karen Arnold and I from Boston College took upon ourselves to take the text messaging wing. So there was two sides of it. There were 70,000 students who were randomized to get text messages and virtual advising. And there was another 80,000 students who were basically on the ground, got text messaging, but it was from their counselor or their college advisor. So they had that direct interaction face-to-face. Karen Arnold and I were asked to evaluate just under 1 million text message conversations. I thought we would die if this happened. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we learned because I think that that's important, and I'll try to do it really fast. So as I said, we randomized these 70,000 students. We 35,000 PSAT takers who took the PSAT in 2013. They answered a question: would you like to receive on-time information about steps and tasks you need to do to matriculate to college on time? So these students, I'm not going to explain how we split them up. We made sure that the groups were equally matched, and these students ended up receiving messages. So we started in spring of their junior year. They got messages all through the rest of their junior year, all of their senior year of high school, and then this summer after they graduated. We worked with a group called You Aspire. They're a group that provides financial aid assistance. They do training. They actually had all of the advisors who were trained, who were virtual advisors, who were responding to all of these text messages from the students. And so when we were now handed this idea of looking at 1 million text messages, first of all, we couldn't even find software that could handle it. It was too large, so we were going to different software groups. And we ended up working with Stata, which has a research arm, thank goodness, called WordStat, and a program called QDA Minor. That's what we ended up using because it could handle this large data set. But we wanted to understand what's happening in these text messaging conversations, what's going on with the students, what were the obstacles they were facing, and can students receive personalized information from a virtual advisor? And so we had to build out this categorization dictionary, which is basically the idea you have to go through every bit of text in your transcript and cover at least 80% of the words. And so in that 1 million text message conversations, we had to cover 80% of the words. And what WordStat does is it builds out a way to say, based on how you built this dictionary, so we've tested it. That took us almost 1.5 years to write the dictionary and to test that. We took it back to the advisors to make sure we had picked up everything that they felt like they were covering. Anyway, what I wanted to show you, this is text message number 7, which was, do you know the application deadlines for each of the colleges you want to apply to? If they said yes, great. When is the first application due? If they said no, that's okay. I can help you look that up. Which college is your first choice? Well, thankfully, you see college names is the largest thing that came up. You would think that when you look at this text message, right? If it told us it was the military or it was something else, we'd be worried because you're asking them to tell you the college name. So it was nice that we had some double checks in there. This is what I wanted to show you just in a nutshell without going into the real specifics of how we calculated this. But if you look across every single message, navigation was either number 1 or number 2. So it's the details. they're still really confused about the process. They don't know what they need to do. And then it was financial, and you can tell financial really builds up at the end. And relational. Relational was really important in the beginning, and it was really important again in the end. And so there was a gap in the middle where it wasn't as much, and then they come back to that relational piece of their interaction with the counselors. We broke it down by looking at the number of students who engaged highly in the process versus medium engagers and low engagers. And we also wanted to look at what's happening with the relational aspect of the intervention. And so you can see the gray line is our high engagers. They go up and then up and up and up through the end. So something was definitely happening in the intervention where the high engagers really felt like they were building this relationship with these advisors, and they felt like they could trust them, and they felt like they could share information. Where you see kind of the low engagers and the moderate engagers they don't go very high at all. They're kind of stay status. And so one of the things we learned was, one, yes, they can develop a relationship with advisors over text messaging, that the texts were the most helpful when they were trying to navigate very concrete tasks that they needed to do, or trying to understand them and what they needed to do. This is the piece that I think becomes really important, because I think you touched on it earlier when you were talking about curriculum. Is that one?
Yeah.
Okay, when you were talking about curriculum.
I'm being generous.
Thanks. The idea that students don't go through this process sequentially. They go through this process very much in a roundabout, squiggly line, a million different ways. And so we crunch out all these guidelines. We say, here's your tasks that you need to do in 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. Well, they don't approach it that way. And so we found that they're coming in and out of this process. I had a student, I was in California, texted at 3:30 in the morning. I was terrified. She's like, help, it's an emergency. Are you there? Thank goodness I was on, because I went on to an actual program on my computer. They weren't texting my phone. Can you imagine that? Not many thousand students texting my phone. Anyway, I was panicked because I thought something really bad had happened. And it turned out, I was afraid to respond because I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get police to find her, because I didn't have an address. All I had was this cell phone number. So I responded, and she said, I'm trying to do my FAFSA and I can't answer this question. I took a deep breath, and then I helped her with her FAFSA. But let me just say that when we're looking at this, it really is about looking at a field full of pebbles for students. All kinds of obstacles and things that come up for them in the process. I think technology can be used to automate some of the information. However, it can't replace the human interaction of a person who's guiding them through the process. When you look at the social emotional learning competencies, and you think about all of the things that are happening in the process, we're actually touching on every single one of these. And when we're looking at some of the issues that came up in the transition process, not only are we helping them to gain some of these skills that they still haven't developed or they're still working on, they're watching us do that to model some of them, but they're also learning how to do that, which is really interesting if you think about, here they are, 17, 18 years old, trying to navigate this transition time. And these are skills that they're still learning. So I think when we're sitting here and we're talking about early childhood and elementary and middle and high school, there's so much work that can be done around this. And so I think at the end of the day, we want equity. The reality is, and if we talk about college access, all you have to do is look at the news right now. We know that there are some families and students who are going to do whatever they can to get everything they can. And we want to actually remove the wall, and we want to make sure that all students have access and are able to get there. So.
We want to remove all walls. Thank you so much.
I really like the visual.
Please, if you have any questions, write them down and we'll have time to. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Mariam is gonna take us to the refugee crisis in Syria.
My file.
Where? Oh, in the folder? Yeah, but she put them on.
Called Mariam. Do you want me to open it from my email? I can do that. No,
Oops.
that's really on the presentation.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So you're sorry.
No worries. I do have it, we just need to open this file. Yes, thank you, thank you. Okay. Well, we'll do that later. All right, good afternoon, I think I can say that now. My name is Mary Sheridan, as I already explained. I am from Iran and I'm assistant professor at James Madison University. My study is, I looked at a different angle. Many of the presentations so far are completely connected to what I'm going to discuss today with you all. I've collected data from teachers who are currently living and working inside the war zone in Syria, in Damascus, and area around it. The location of this, which I will explain more when we go through that, it's I can't completely reveal where they are because I don't know exactly where they are, but they are in the areas of living and working in Damascus. So you have, many of us have, everybody around the world knows that what's going on in Syria, it's been a long time that is happening. In 2012, it was a time that it announced that Syria is officially in the war. And that was the time before that it was all happening during the Arab Spring, and then Syria started to become a civil war, which is a major war so far. Currently, Syria is known as the world's largest producer of both internally displaced people and refugees. I have some numbers here, which are heartbreaking at the same time very eye-opening. When we look at these numbers, we'll see what's going on in Syria. Many of the people, we still have 13.1 million people that they need assistance and helps. And you see that the countries that are around this map, many of them moved to Turkey, many of them in Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan. If you're from Turkey, unfortunately, they don't share the same language, but they share the border. So that's the easiest way to get there because you want to, and the United Nation built a lot of refugee camp there, but lack of language skills, it's a huge problem, especially for education for children. There are so many different issues. Every one of these countries have many, many studies that are going on to see how we can help this crisis that is happening, especially in the education part, because majority of these kids, half of this population of children who are refugees in different countries or internally displaced, half of the population overall are children. So the major concern as an educator is what is happening for their education. If they're alive, the first thing that you need to think about Maslow, right? All of those priorities and hierarchy of the needs. They have enough food? Do they have shelters? Do they have, and after having all of this, do they have access to education? So that's a major question that is coming up, access to education. I did not look at the refugee camps around in different countries. I looked at specifically inside the war zone, and I explained how did I get access to this area. This is a picture of the classroom. It's nothing like the classroom that we know, right? So according to the humanitarian law, schools are protected from any kind of attack during the war. Guess what? That's the first reason that schools are the first target, because army used the schools as a shelter to do their own thing, and the schools start to become attacked by all different targets. And in Syria currently is out of 10 schools, 7 of them are destroyed. So they're not specifically classrooms that look like classrooms. The schools that I'm talking about are the basement schools, or the schools that are in the top of the mountain, any place that is not accessible. It doesn't have American or westernized as a classroom or school site, but it's something that is safer than other places. There are not enough oxygen, there are not enough light, there's nothing that you could call that classroom that you want your kid or anybody who is related to, or anybody as a human being be there. So when the schools are look like this, the question is, if there is an education that is happening, who are the teachers? Who is willing to go to teaching in places that does not look like the classroom, right? Overall, we all are talking about education, about the teachers. And being a teacher, we know how hard it is. Every day you deal with some sort of drama or some sort of problems. Either it's related to the children, either it's related to lack of support that you get from administration, financial problems, of course, training that every day you face with the children with special needs that you don't have enough training, you don't have enough support, classrooms that are not completely organized, lack of facilities, and all of these day-to-day challenges that we all are familiar with it. So being a teacher is hard. Now imagine that you are in an active war zone and you were a teacher. In addition to all of this problem of day-to-day being a teacher, you have to add to this that you have to protect your safety and be alive, and you have to go to the basement classroom. So living in a crisis and area of armed conflict expose you to the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders for sure, and the trauma that you get from being attacked all the time and being in danger of save your life. These teachers are not exceptions, so they are all suffering from all of this crisis that's happening in them. They lose their family, their husbands, usually because these teachers that I collected data, majority of them are female. I'm just referring to the females more in my conversation that you can hear. So their husbands are either they're killed or they're in war, active war. They go and they try to save the country and all of this. Their children are in danger. They don't have enough food. So the teachers are suffering by themselves. And at the same time, when you are going to the classroom, in addition of being a teacher and teaching children, you're a caregiver. After parents, you're this person who comes to you to get help. So is a teacher really ready for this, to provide any more supports in addition to all these factors that are pressuring to that person? So that was the question that came to my mind. So I started to get access to these teachers, and then I was like, what is happening? We hear about burnout, right? What is burnout? Burnout is when you have too much pressure at job, you can't continue. There are different factors in burnout, including of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced sense of personal accomplishment. Emotional exhaustion is the time when you're frustrated. You can't continue. You're just always tired. You don't feel happy. You're depressed. And we heard many of my colleagues, they all explain about how these factors affecting quality of teacher in their occupation and also quality of uh, teaching that they provide for children. Depersonalization is the time that you just pull out from what you're doing. You're not there completely. You don't feel like belonging. You don't feel like you want to really care about it. That happens when the burnout happens. And the other one is reduced sense of personal accomplishment, which is a huge factor. And we will talk about it, that my data showed how much this one factor specifically in burnout can impact in the quality of education, quality of life, quality of job, and satisfaction. Personal accomplishment, sense of personal accomplishment means when you go to work, you feel successful. You feel you're making a change in your life. You see the child and you love it. You enjoy of seeing this child in the classroom. And every time that you teach something, you feel like, I'm doing something great. But when it reduces, it means you don't feel confident. You don't feel enough. You don't feel you belong here, and you don't feel like I am making any kind of changes. I'm not a good teacher. That's the person. That's the sense of personal accomplishment. So these are some of the factors that the question came up. And when you look at the burnout, many of my colleagues talked about it, that depression in teachers, all of these factors that impact on the teacher's quality, there are not enough research about them. So we don't have enough research and background. When I wanted to look at the teachers inside the war zone, I couldn't find the literature. So what I had to look, I was looking at the social workers in the conflict area. Those are one of the areas that there are some research about them. Also nurses and medical profession. Those are some of the other areas that there are some research available. But they all help me to get to the resilience, because when there is burnout, there should be resilience. If these teachers are continuing, they might be burned out. We will find out, but something is there that they continue to be a teacher, right? That's a resilience. The definition of the resilience that I adopted from Masson, and it says resilience is the process of capacity for or outcome of successful adaptation despite challenging or threatening circumstances. There are different definitions, and this is the one that I looked in the literature through. So it's a very important factor, as we discussed, and it's not new, but it's a very important factor to prepare during the war experience, to prepare the person to continue healthy and successful life. And early childhood educators, of course, as we mentioned, they have a role of caregiver, a supporter in the specific situation, and their resilience is critical. If they want to help children to be resilient, they need to be resilient by themselves. However, there's a very little background knowledge and literature about war areas and conflict areas and war zones. So that's encouraged me to look more specifically in this area. So some of the questions that for this research I specifically looked at it was, what is the trauma level of primary teachers in the war zone? What is the burnout level of primary teachers in the war zone? What is the resilience level of primary teachers in the war zone? And what is the relationship between trauma, burnout, and resilience? These are the factors that I looked at it. So let's tell the story of how did I get access to this. It's always a question for people. I didn't go to Syria. I am a Muslim female from Middle East. So I don't call myself as an insider, but I had the privilege to be accepted more easily than Western colleagues that they might not have enough background or enough connection with the society. So they accepted me. I got my PhD in New York, University of Buffalo, and I worked, one of my advisors in my dissertation, he was from Syria, and he and his colleagues, they founded these schools inside the basement. So they collected money. Instead of sending this money to the army, they send it the money for education. So they asked me and my advisor to start helping them with developing curriculum for the schools that are starting from scratch, because the whole war just changed the whole policies and principles in the education, so they had to start very basically. And Dr. Shupley, my one of my committee members, he introduced me to these wonderful teachers inside the war room and said, they do anything. If you want to just bring their voices to the board, they answer your questions, even though they are not in the shape that they have any time to sit down and answer the questionnaires, but they will do that. So I started to talk with them on the phone, and they were all like, we'll do anything, you just bring our voice to the board, and we will do anything. So we identified the participants in the elementary schools. So they have around 300 teachers in different levels. 70 teachers were in the primary level. So my focus was primary level, and I wanted to see, I couldn't say just early childhood because it was a combination. So we said any level from 0 to 9 years old, we will accept that teacher. So 70 teachers out of 70, I got all of them. So we sent the invitation, and the process was they had access to internet. So I sent the questionnaire to them by email, but we used of course, we used the secured system, and I had to go through IRB. It was a lot of IRB things that was going on. And we asked them to sit down in front of the computer, fill out the questionnaire, and then for the qualitative part, because this is a mixed method research, for the quantitative part, they answered the questionnaires, and for the qualitative part, they still just sitting and answering the short answer questions. One of the major problem was they had access to internet, but they didn't have access to computers. So they had to stay in the line for hours to just sit in front of the computer to do that. And they did it, all of them, 70 out of 70. I got all of this back, which is fascinating. So these are some of the pictures of my kids. I love to call that, even though I never met them. But these are some of the classrooms. As you can see, I wish there was a little less light, but if you can see, they're covered. If there is a window, they're covered. All of the windows are covered. Or there's no windows. These are all basements. And thank you. These are all basements that you can see at these kids. So they're a combination of different ages. They try their best to separate the ages, but it depends. So I have a short video. I'm hoping that I can run it, because this is a very important video that I love to you guys see it. Hopefully I can. Yes. This is a video of this children that I got the
واحد
chance to
راسه
work
طاير
with
واحد
them.
ايده طايرة واحد مرة بابا
الحمد لله على سلامتكم. شو صار؟
اساسا ما خاف ما
أول ما أخوك قال إنه الطلاب إسعاف أنا فكرت حدا سوا من أخواتي طلعت عليهم ما فيه أشياء طلع هو يعني.
All right. The point of sharing this video is not what they are talking about. I wanted you to, at first, just think about what you saw. They were just in the street. They were talking, and everything was okay. And then bomb dropped, and they all started running. And then they went to this room, and they were laughing. They were like, nothing happened. It was a bomb, and they were still laughing. So there are two different angles that we can look at it. Kids are resilient, but they're desensitized. So you can look at these two different. No kid in the world should live like that. That one kid with the cat, he got killed 2 days after they shared the video with me, and that was very heartbreaking to think about what they're going through. But anyway, you see the children, these are the kids that we worked with them. The research is mixed method, as I said, and there are two different set of questionnaires that I used. Quantitative methods, I used demographic information, which I developed it. We've asked about their background information. Trauma scales, horror trauma scales that we used it. All of them is in Arabic language. Oh, okay, so I'm not going to go through the quantitative part because those are a lot of numbers and I'm not going to look at this. But the semi-structured interviews, which is the qualitative part, was a major part that and covered. It was a long and significantly covering the quantitative part of it. 10 questions, including of teachers' perception of living in the war zone, stressors and their effect on being a teacher in a war zone, and coping strategies to continue their job. These are the three different angles that we looked at it and we asked the teachers. 70 teachers, as I mentioned, these are some of the information from the quantitative part, which showed that personal accomplishment was higher, resilience was higher, trauma was higher, resilience was down. Burnout was higher, resilience was down. So these are the relationship that we could see from the quantitative data that came out. In the qualitative part, these are the themes that the teachers, after answering the questions, came out. Teacher perception of living in a war zone. They said, we live here because we want to make a change. And some of the quotes that they used was, every day that I want to get out of my house and go to work, I'm not sure if I'm going to see my family when I get back. Am I going to get back or not? I don't know, but it doesn't prevent me from putting my feet out of this house. I'll go there because they need more than my kids. The other one was teaching is a duty during the war. As I said, majority of them are female and they're soldiers. They call themselves, we are soldiers. We go, we fight in the school. Instead of going, getting the gun, we are going to the classroom and we have our pen and pencil. We make the next generation to save our country. And that's our duty. And we do it with all our heart. Religion, faith, and spirituality. Major theme that came out from this. Because the only thing that could help them to feel strong was reading Quran with their family, sitting together, praying together, and making sure that there is a reason behind what is happening in their life. It's not pointless. There is a reason, and any struggle, any adversity that they go through, there is a reason, and it's in their ability to tolerate it. Otherwise, they wouldn't go through that. And they use a lot of quotes from Quran and a lot of proverbs and a lot of stories that they were using to help children to understand why they are living in this situation. Self-accomplishment, as I said, if you remember, we talked about it, that in the burnout is very important. They said that they were thinking before the war, their life was pointless because they didn't have that much purpose. But now, every day when they go and they see this child who can't walk or has a lot of physical issues or mental issues, no parents and all of this, they can bring a smile to this child or teach the child to write down. That makes a change in their perspective. And encouraging the positive behavior, they use a lot of games and storytellings for children to help them to understand. And again, it's related to their beliefs, to help them to understand what's the point of being in this situation. So these are all the same. The only thing is 70 out of 70 that I love to highlight it is these teachers. It's always very questioning from my American colleagues, how would you get 70 out of 70 questions? And it's because these teachers are dedicated. Mm-hmm. And I paid them just $10. The reason was I want to compensate. It's nothing, but it counts in Islamic rule. It's money needs to be halal, right? You need to work for the money that you earn. That was one of the reasons, and the other one was because they wanted the voice of them to be heard in the world. So that's about it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I want to finish my presentation with this smiley face because I know some of you really got hurt with that. You're feeling that hurt with that video, but look at them, they smile. Children are resilient.
Thank you so much. Alright, now to our study, and if we were gonna pay $10 for each participant, it's gonna be a very expensive study. Alright, so earlier I tried to briefly just introduce AIMS to you and introduce Mapping the Terrain as the first study in the empirical research that we've been conducting since last year. We launched a pilot of that Mapping the Terrain. We call it Web 1, we can call it pilot, we can give it different names, but the idea was really to experiment with this whole concept and construct in the third space. What is in the third space that we can research? What is it that can inform our work and inform policymakers, inform others? But at the same time, we wanted to also learn more about our method, and we wanted to learn more about our measures, scales, subscales, and their applicability in the context we work on. We also had issues with the IRB, Mariam, so we're still working with the IRB, hoping that our next wave will go smoother. But that was something that was important for us because we wanted our researchers that are local in the different countries to also abide by ethical conduct of research and to also be more familiar with what's expected from conducting ethical research on human subjects, involvement of human subjects. So we have about 25,000 participants in our study. We went to 16 different countries. I'll mention those to you. And we targeted 5 groups. Remember, this is pilot. We're still in the pilot. We're learning, so we tried to make it as wide and as large as possible. The high school students, that was the sticky point with the IRB because most of the countries were younger than 18. Parents, teachers, administrators in the schools where we reach students. And then we also had a sample of university students that we surveyed. Those are the countries that we that participated in our study. We use convenient sampling because these are mainly the countries where IIIT has access. Not necessarily offices, but affiliates or people who were willing to work with us and who were actually interested in our study. In July, when we launched the study, we met in Istanbul with a lot of the offices that came together. We had a 3-day meeting there, and they presented the study to them and presented the research. And we said, okay, whoever is willing, please, continue the conversation and please let us know these are the requirements and we need to hear from you if you're interested. So 16 came through. Now they're not all Muslim societies as you see, but most of them, all of them actually were interested, like Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we weren't able to get a large sample. We got one sample from one school that was an Islamic school in Hong Kong. And in other places, like in Tajikistan, part of Russia, we weren't able to reach all the schools, but there were also, it's largely Muslim area of Russia, so we were able to reach many participants. Indonesia, Malaysia, Bangladesh, most of the others, Uganda is not, Tanzania, Mauritius, they're not Muslim majority schools and countries anyway. What we were interested in are those 5 constructs we mentioned earlier. I don't know if you recall them. That's the forgiveness, empathy. These were the 4 constructs that we were really focusing on. Forgiveness, empathy, community-mindedness, and moral reasoning. We also hypothesized that there are other additional variables that can be mediator or moderator to see where people stand on the constructs empathy, forgiveness, moral reasoning, and community mindedness. Those were self-efficacy, sense of belonging, and religiosity. What I will present to you are just initial results for the first 6 countries out of the 16. We now have actually entered the data for 12 of the countries, but we haven't been able to conduct the analysis yet to all of these. We are working with a methodologist at George Mason University. We're also part of, I should have said this earlier, that we have a research team that has been helping us as we move forward with the research, not just here on staff like Mariam and Saulat and others, but also, from American University, we have a consultant, we have someone from Indiana University. That's why we're going through IRB through Indiana University. But to briefly give you an idea of our results, here is the sample size from the 6 different countries based on the 5 groups I mentioned to you. You would see that, of course, we wanted to get to as many students as we can. We were able to get to their parents, but not, of course, all, which is always the return with parents is lower. We also get to the teachers, smaller because those teachers are in those schools. We surveyed the students and university students, as you see. Administrators, of course, were the smallest because there weren't too many administrators that were in the schools we reached. Now, I cannot say that we randomized our samples within each country because easy access, of course, convenient sampling was at play. Some more than others. So in some places, like in Bosnia, they really went across all the schools, selected from different districts and randomly selected those schools. In other places, Indonesia, they went to the 5 largest districts. Indonesia is a huge, 240, I think, million, and so many islands. So for our purposes, we went to 5 different districts to get to our samples. They were given a survey for each group. I should have said students, for example, it was 220 items. For teachers, around the 200 and so forth. So we had a large questionnaire that was translated into different languages. We asked everyone to translate and back translate into English to ensure accuracy. Of course, now someone might say, well, how do you define forgiveness in the context? We talked about context earlier, right? How do you define forgiveness in the context of Malaysia versus Sudan? Are we talking about the same thing? Of course, we also did our homework and looked at the literature and what we found in terms of the definitions and looked at those definitions that really relate to the studies that were done in international context. Okay. Here are the scales that we used. They had validity and reliability in international context. And as you see, for each one of them, there were different subscales that we used. Fantasy and imagination. We felt like those kinds of subscales will not fit the population that we will work with and that we were trying to survey. So we took that out and chose the ones that the subscales we felt were most representative, sensitive to the context we're in. I don't want to, do too much of the numbers here, but we were so happy with the reliability that we got on the measures. So, which meant that there is promise in the methodology we're using, there is promise in the scales that we utilize in our study. Here are just some of the means on the different constructs I mentioned to you and how they're represented in the different countries. I want to say something about religiosity because we thought it's a very important concept and construct to measure There were probably 12 items. Some of them were not even religiosity, but they were perceived as religiosity. And those items created so many problems for us that in some places we had to remove them because of sensitivities to questions such as, I volunteer at my place of worship. Some people felt like the government, whoever is in charge, will not allow us to ask these kinds of questions. We had some who had to modify the religiosity questions as well. And you would think, and we know from the literature, that people who are more religious are actually more empathetic, more forgiving, and so forth, depending on their perceptions of religion. But these connections, correlations are existent in the literature. But unfortunately, we were not able to have religiosity in some of these basically surveys. And you see that it's all high in all the different places. So not surprisingly, not in Tetristan, the yellow, because in Tetristan it's a different. And what we did in April, we had the different researchers from those 6 countries come into our conference, and they presented their data from their perspective. And for Tetristan, her interpretation of that was that people are coming out of this Soviet Union mentality where religion was, forbidden and so forth, and they're trying to adapt and adopt their own way of being religious in a way that is inclusive, in a way that allows for the rest of the interaction with the rest of Russia to be there and to be present. This is one way to look at this, but I'm sure there are multiple ways to interpret this data. We took forgiveness and community-mindedness as our outcome variables, and I don't want to get into the model and how we hypothesize, but this is how this is how the scoring worked for this sample from these different countries, in terms of where they see themselves from 1 to 5 on the community-mindedness and on the forgiveness. And the numbers, I guess, speak to themselves. Many people were more on the agreement because it was a disagree to strongly agree kind of scale, on the agreement with importance of items related to forgiveness and community-mindedness. And community-mindedness was one that was an interesting construct because it hasn't been researched a lot, and we found few studies, some in Canada and some in internationally. But it was an important one. I think one of you mentioned that looking at our concept note, you saw that we wanted to include this whole community orientation. And I was just telling David during the break that we want to continue that and even look more into this whole dichotomy of the individualistic versus the collective. And does it really still exist? We don't know. We have it, guessed that societies and communities we're interested in will be actually still high on the community-mindedness, but we don't know how much it's still a collective society. Looking at globalization, Dr. Owen on the social media stuff, what's happening when someone answered the question. We had one of the questions is that I make friends on social media, and a lot of the kids said, yeah, we make friends on social media, and maybe those are not even friends in the way we think friends are, right? Or family, and how we relate to our families. So these are changes that we haven't been able to look into and dig deeper into, but they're on our mind as we move on with our study. Our data from those 6 countries provides us with this confirmation that our predictors are, valid and reliable in predicting the outcomes of community-mindedness and forgiveness. There are lots of other different slides that, show some prediction results to explain the model. I don't need to go into, but you look at the quick significance for those researchers. Quantitative researchers would like to see significant levels. We had very high significance. And if you talk to our methodologist, he's going to say, oh, they're going to, of course, be statistically significant because we have a large sample. And I like to get excited about these results because this is a pilot I wasn't even expecting to to get any good reliability on the measures we use. But that's good news for us in terms of developing our measures further. And for us, what we would like to do is actually also look at, how can we, and there's a slide I usually like to present with our model where the human development trajectory that we adopted, the spiral dynamic model, I don't know if people are familiar with it, but it's on top of what we believe is where we would like transformation to happen. Moving people from this egocentric to more worldly orientation. There are 9 different spaces or states of mind that people can be positioned at, and how we can actually relate that to universal Islamic values. We have different groups working on the theoretical pieces, looking at Quranic verses and teachings that connect to universal values, such as forgiveness, empathy, and others. But when the next wave, we'd like to add more to those. From the conversation, some of you talked about meaning making. This is a very important Quranic value, as well as a cognitive skill that is important for 21st century skills that we're interested in. Empathy is the same, forgiveness is the same. We added gratitude because we think gratitude is a good indicator of Muslim values, as well as being grateful for your life, for who you are. And lots of those are actually in the note, concept note are already defined, so I don't need to go back into that. But I wanted to give you just a glimpse of where we are in terms of our research. I'm still looking at the prediction results here, and it shows you that we had good predictors of our forgiveness and community mindedness. Here are some of the differences we found on both in terms of what were the most important, not necessarily differences, but what were the most important variables that played a role in the way people responded to community mindedness items and forgiveness items. I want to say that the forgiveness measure, we had one that has been tested in so many contexts, and we had one that is in development, so we don't have established reliability and validity for the measure. And actually, it was adapted from a group of psychologists at George Mason that, as one of the researchers, we took that measure, tried it, and I published on that already, tried it in Middle Eastern context, Palestine, Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, and Jordan. And we wanted to see teachers' attitudes towards forgiveness, and we used these hypothetical scenarios to test that. And it showed good promise, which means in our development of the methodology, we are feeling confident that our measures at least have some promise, and we will definitely keep improving them. In terms of the sampling and data collection, we have huge data sets, and we hired 2 people we're using Remark to read the data, but we have such variation in the quality because we use paper and pencil. The researchers will probably laugh, how come we didn't use online, or smartphones or smart questionnaires. We just were not confident we will get them back, to be honest with you. And so the simplest way was paper, pencil, scan them back to us, and we will do the data entry. So Hasna, who introduced herself this morning, has been doing data entry since February. And we have another guy who has been doing data entry for us. So hopefully we want to think of different ways, but we also want to ensure that our data is reliable, and it's not just, any survey that looked like people just, chose one answer and just all, these were thrown away. So on the final analysis, we might lose. I'm sure we will lose. And the prediction is about 30% of our survey will go to trash. And but we still have a large sample to learn from for the next wave. It will help us improve our methodology as well as our measures and constructs. And is our model meaningful? Does it really contribute? If we research values, does that contribute to well-being at all? And how do we translate that into something that is practical, into something that we can implement. These are the kinds of questions we're struggling with, but we're happy with where we are. I think I didn't expect us to be here. And definitely we have a promising model to interpret our data. So I'm gonna stop here so we can allow a few moments for questions for the three of us. And I'm happy to talk more. I've been presenting this and I can provide even further information if needed. Thank you so much for listening.